it's Grace from the CSE, and welcome to the #Finance podcast. I'm here today with Kim Rivers, CEO of Trulieve. And so I just wanted to start off the podcast by asking you kind of what, as a female in cannabis, what advice can you offer other women looking to become leaders in the cannabis industry?
So I would say just to take your seat at the table. That's what I say in general when asked about women and female entrepreneurship. I think so often that we as women sometimes have a tendency to not speak up and speak out. And really, I think that, this industry, like many others, but this industry particularly because of the high rate of growth and just the numerous opportunities, and also because there is, I believe it's important part of the industry to have a level of compassion. And I believe as females, oftentimes we have and are tapped in a little bit more specifically to that compassionate element, which I believe is very important in this space.
Oh, that's great. And so do you think that the cannabis industry is as welcoming as it appears to be kind of in the news?
I think that when you're talking about fast-growing, particularly public companies, I can say that I would like to see more women when I attend conferences or when I'm on panels. It does seem that I am, one of the only or one of the few women in a sea of gray suits. So while I think that certainly if you think about perhaps at more of the local level or more of the cottage industry aspect of cannabis, you tend to see perhaps some more diversity. I think that unfortunately, as an industry, we are falling behind as those companies grow and progress to again the publicly listed level.
Okay, great. And why do you think that that they're falling behind?
I think that it's just the nature of in general, and I think that it's cannabis is at some point becomes, I don't want to say no different, because of course every industry has its own differences, but I think that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? So as women or people of color, for example, if there's not as big of a pool of us who have been involved in public companies, who have been involved in perhaps at the leadership level on boards. And so, as an example, in Trulieve, we have a very specific part of our culture is to encourage minority employment. And so that is part of who we are, and we've been very purposeful about it because one of my goals personally, is to prove that you can be a successful, profit-driven company with inclusion, and that doesn't have to be an aside. It can be part of who you are as a core, and you can blow it out of the charts with respect to success. Mm-hmm. So I think that as more companies are able to post profitability, then it can those can be models for other companies to perhaps look at. And I personally love that the social equity conversation is bubbling up, at least at some of the state levels, because I think it is a very important part of our industry.
And do you think that, is this recently that conversation has been brought up?
Yes,
okay.
I believe so.
And what do you think is influencing that conversation?
I think that, folks are certainly who have, been disenfranchised are certainly making their voices heard, which I think is great. I also think that there is, a movement in the U.S. right now that's been happening, and a lot of that has to do with national politics, which we don't have to get into. But, so I think that folks are feeling a bit frustrated and a little bit more empowered to point out those. And look, our industry, we should have accountability for that, right? I mean, we're in an industry where folks, lost their freedom and spent time in prison, and so, absolutely, we have those of us that are successful in this industry, I believe, have a responsibility.
It's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah.
And so just going back on the public, the public side, so what was the strategy behind Trulieve going public?
So the strategy was very simple. It's that we had successfully penetrated the market in Florida and built our brand in Florida, and we were ready to not only continue that in a meaningful way, and knew that we had other public companies entering our market, and so we needed to make sure that we could compete there, but also to take that experience and mimic it in other states. And so we were ready to really become a true multi-state operator, different from a multi-state aggregator, multi-state operator. And so
what is the difference there?
I think that there's strategies, right, that, we hear it, that's a land grab, and we're just going to put pins on a map and grab assets whenever we can. But I think it's questionable in terms of whether or not there's true intentional brand building going on in the space. And really true operational expertise. And so we first took a little different approach. We wanted to build out and make sure that we could truly penetrate a market and build the systems and all of the back of house operational expertise that's needed before we kind of lifted our head and said, okay, we're ready to take this show on the road. And so that was the genesis of us deciding to go public.
Oh, that's great. And so it's been successful this far. I mean, you guys have done really well, and I mean, I really enjoyed it. I did extensive research on you, and it just sounds like you guys really have that differentiating factor as a cannabis company, because it says it in your name. You guys are believers. You call your customers Trulievers, which I think is super cute. I love that. Did you come up with that? Do you work in the branding side of things?
I'm a little passionate about marketing. So
that's great.
The Trulieve name came at about 3 a.m.
Nice.
When we were
as all good names do.
Yes. And of course, you look back and you look at all the names that you didn't pick and you say, oh my gosh, thank goodness, right? It's pretty funny, but and you're absolutely right. We are huge believers, and we look to create authentic relationships with our customers, and so that's the kind of the truth part of it. And so I appreciate you recognizing that.
Thanks. And so, what would you say that's a differentiating factor for Trulieve?
Absolutely. So I think that again, the ability to build two-way relationships. So I think that's what makes a lot of brands great, is that the customer feels connected to the brand, and so developing a culture around that, which is done through a number of ways, and that really is our competitive advantage. Is we have consistent in-store experiences. You're going to have the same experience when you go into the store in Miami that you will when you go into the store in Tallahassee. Product variety, product quality. We stand behind our products. We accept returns, no questions asked. It's very unusual in the cannabis space, but our return rate is less than 2%.
Yep.
So it's why wouldn't you do that again, to make sure that relationship is there with your customer, and then finally, just having the quality of people. So giving folks an opportunity to grow within our company, to feel like they're a part of and connected to our company is very important.
That's good. And so I just want to draw back to the flower, and how you kind of were the first cannabis, or you're the only cannabis company that can sell flower in Florida.
We're not the only.
Oh, not
we
the only.
were
Okay.
the first.
Okay,
we were the first.
Okay.
Yes. So important distinction for any of our competitors who are listening. So no, we were the first, and and now there are 3 companies that are selling smokable flower. It was a huge, we believe, game changer in our market in Florida. We sort of, as I won't knock on my state, but the thing's a little maybe in reverse, and that concentrate and oil products have been selling now for over 2 years. We've been selling vaporized flower now for a year, but smokable flower was specifically prohibited under our statute. And so the governor basically came out and said, this is against the Constitution. I'm dropping the gauntlet. March 15th, legislature, you have to pass this law. And so they did. We had our stores fully stocked on March 15th. The governor didn't sign the bill until March 18th, but we were ready to go with those sales. So
wow, that's and so it was just because you asked. Really?
Well, it was...
Or you found that loophole that was like, okay, if I package it like this, then...
well, we were just following the law. And so, it's very straightforward. I mean, the law was written with very specific requirements for packaging, very specific labeling requirements. And so we felt that we knew what they were asking for. We filed our amendment as soon as the bill passed. We filed an amendment for product approval with the Department of Health, and the product was approved. And And so,
it's fast.
It was very, very fast. And, we've been successful, I think, in our first to market strategy by of course, being aggressive and also planning ahead. So it's not only that we have smokable flower, but in Q1, we built out and have operational 126,000 additional square footage of cultivation to support smokable flower. So in Florida and in most markets, supply chain management, which I know is not necessarily like a very exciting topic, but supply chain management is, in my mind, one of the keys to success in this industry because, and especially if you're planning to build a profitable business in this industry, because if you're retail only and you're in a wholesale market, if you don't have your supply chain really tightly managed, you're looking at really probably a best case scenario 15% margin business. So it is, and you'll see when Trulieve goes into other states that we really are looking at one, scale, and two, having that supply chain managed, and with an end goal of making sure that our customers can have consistent, high quality product,
right,
which is very important.
And so now with all these different cannabis companies competing with each other, it's almost as if everyone should kind of find their place and work together to start a big operation. Is that kind of how you're seeing it? Instead of everybody kind of taking this different role, they should find like their place within the supply chain instead of being the number one.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, right?
Yeah.
And I think it really does depend. I mean, we've got basically the way I look at it, and the way I think, unfortunately for analysts, they have to look at it, which has been interesting, is that it's not just one model for the U.S. It's 50 models because you have 50 different sets of regulatory regimes. And so I think about it, you have 50 mini countries, right, that you have to understand what is allowed and not allowed within that country. And so each market's going to be approached a little bit differently. But I think, again, whether or not, a company decides to own the supply chain, like from seed to sale, which we don't have a choice in Florida, that's what we have to do, and it's optional in other states, or whether or not they choose to work and have contractual relationships to have specific terms outlined for with other companies in the supply chain. Again, I think it's just really important that companies are cognizant and thinking about, especially companies that are getting started, that supply chain relationships are incredibly critical.
Yeah. And so you're going into new markets now. I hear you're going into California, and I think it's Massachusetts.
Massachusetts, yeah.
So you'll be there. And so how do you think, I mean, you built up that Florida brand.
Yep.
And would you say, I think that your success, a lot to do with your success, is you're from Florida, right? So and you've got that law degree as well to help you. So how are you going to build that same Florida success in the different states?
Yeah, so there's a lot in that question. I think one of the things is that because Florida is strictly vertically integrated, we've had to become and develop expertise in each part of that chain. So we have over 600,000 square feet of active grow. We have we're shipping over 80,000 products per week in our 55,000 square foot production facility, over 170 SKUs that we manufacture, and then we have, of course, 27 at this point retail outlets. And so we've had to develop expertise in each section of the chain. And so depending on the market we're going into, what's great is that we can take that expertise or pieces of that chain and apply it to the relevant market. And so I think that's number one. Number two, we recognize, right, that we're kind of going to be, from this point forward, the outsiders in markets that we're entering. So it's been really important for us to think about our branding strategy.
Right.
And so in 2019, we've been working on it, actually at the end of 2018, our 3-tier branding strategy. So we took a page from Whole Foods. It's very simple. Our Trulieve brand is foundational brand. That's our own house branded products. That will be segmented into 3 parts: new users, everyday products, and then specialty products that you maybe want to use with friends on a Friday night, is how I think about it. And so with that, those are Trulieve branded products, similar to the 365 brand at Whole Foods. The next tier is having best in breed national brands available on our shelves. So we recently announced deals with Slang, Binsk, Loves Ovens.
Slang's going to be in here this afternoon.
Oh, that's wonderful, yeah. And so really what we feel are best-in-class brands that have been successful in highly competitive markets. So we're talking about companies from California, Colorado. They've had to slug it out for a number of years, right? And they've risen to the top. So that'll be our second tier. And then finally, and this goes to your question, is really how do we develop quick relationships in a local market? So Whole Foods, when they go into a market, they actually have a local product fair.
I really like this. I saw this in one of your interviews.
Yeah, and they bring in they bring in local products, and they give them a chance to compete for shelf space.
Yeah.
And so what that does is a couple of things, and we've seen it. We launched our first local brand with Sunshine Cannabis in Florida. And it's amazing. I mean, they have, a cult following. They're marketing Trulieve all over the place, and it does a couple of things. All of a sudden, we have street cred that, quite frankly, we would never have as a public company.
Yeah.
And we're able to, again, kind of break down that stigma of, oh, you're just a corporation. You're just big box cannabis moving into our backyard.
Exactly.
And again, with a focus on how can we quickly develop authenticity, because if we can get you into our store, our ability to connect with that person and to really create that, or for them to experience that elevated level of service, we feel confident that we can keep their business.
Yeah, that's really great. And also that leads into my other question about your loyalty program.
Mm-hmm.
And I've just kind of been through the research I've done in preparing for Weed Week. I've just kind of looked at a lot of these big cannabis plays now have loyalty programs.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm wondering, is the next leg up for cannabis companies the aggregation of data from customers? And if so, where will that data go?
So we are a data-driven company. We currently, one of my key executive team members is my chief information officer. And so, and we have to be data-driven because it informs what we make, how we make it, what's on the shelves where, how much of it, et cetera. Again, that whole supply chain management. So, and we're also interested in what are customers responding to? What do they like that we do? What don't they like? And so creating those feedback loops is critical. And again, that goes back to the relationship and it being two-way and not one-way. So data is very important to us. We do not and do have no plans to aggregate or sell data. We've actually been approached by some third-party companies that want to offer us free services or want us to run this program or want us to use this software, and really they're data ad companies. And so we're cognizant of it. I would encourage...
Well, not just data ad, but I can just see healthcare professionals, right? Because they're turning the whole healthcare system, trying to AI.
Yes.
A lot of aspects to it. So it's almost like if they can grab the data, then they can repurpose it into AI. Would you ever do something like that? You would never...
I don't know. All I know is that right now, especially in Florida, it's a medical market. It's HIPAA protected. We're very... recovering lawyer, right? Very cognizant of that. And so, I think that there are good uses of data, and then I think that there are perhaps, self-serving commercial uses of data. And so being cognizant of where those lines are, and we've shied away from it to date just because we don't have a clear view on exactly how it would be utilized.
Yeah, and have you heard any kind of conversations from HIPAA or like any kind of, have they been approached yet by different cannabis companies that you're aware of?
Not that, no.
Okay.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of.
And so I guess my other question as well is for medical cannabis. Where do you see people who have to use medical cannabis in the workplace? Like how are they going to be able to do that?
Great question. So in the U.S., it's really employer specific unless that state has passed a law that offers protection. And so generally speaking, though, in most states, Florida included, it really is up to the employer. We are starting to see some movement there in terms of some businesses that are choosing to treat medical cannabis like any other prescription medication. So that if you test positive for THC and you have your medical card, that isn't grounds for necessarily termination. However, there's of course no impairment on the job requirements. And so some companies are choosing to go that route. Other companies aren't, unfortunately, and it just is what it is. So
what companies aren't? Do you tend to find
government, for example?
Okay, yeah,
which is a huge employer. It does. It varies widely, company to company.
Yeah, and would you say that somebody from government? I mean, say they're dealing with back pain or something, and they have to use cannabis. Would you say that would be a deterrent of them like working in government? Like they should know they shouldn't be.
It really depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so and how critical it is for their daily function. And also if, what we'll see is, look, if folks are coming off of, for example, an opioid addiction or something like that, then really, and I've heard this firsthand and had conversations, it becomes, to them it's a matter of life and death. So they don't
Exactly.
It's
And yeah, the whole opioid crisis. What is the next step for medical marijuana replacing opioids?
There's definite movement. I'm really excited about that movement because I think that it will not only from just what I see on the front lines for how cannabis truly is changing people's lives, but also in what I hope to be an influx of research and data that supports the use of medical cannabis for a variety of reasons. And so obviously in the U.S. that's one of our biggest challenges is there isn't enough research. There is some research, to be clear. So I bristle a little bit when I hear, oh, there's no research. And I'm like, yeah, there's studies that have been done, particularly in some of the Western states where it has been legalized for a while. But having some really good, thorough studies that can speak specifically to the effectiveness of cannabis as an opioid alternative. And we say alternative because
it's not a replacement yet.
It's important also that folks can't immediately transition. There's a process, and
it was the patient. I think in one of your interviews you had said there's not enough practitioners as there is patients, so they're waiting for their prescriptions to get medical marijuana, and they just kind of turn to opioids because it's like the only thing that they can really help, like ease their pain at the time, right?
I mean, pain's critical, right? I mean, and it becomes urgent quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're not sleeping and sleep and eat, those are two primary human functions, right? And so if one of those is off, as your primal kind of survival mechanism kicks in. And so, there was a while in Florida, we've gotten much better, but there was a while when the program first started that cards were taking, upwards of 3 months to get. And so if you have a terminal cancer patient, for example, and I'll never forget, there were more than one episode of tears and just horrible stories of folks who were not able to get relief prior to passing. And so thankfully the state was responsive, and they've shortened that process now to inside a week. So it's been a great evolution of the program in Florida. We do still have challenges with the numbers of physicians versus the number of patients, particularly now that we're seeing that patient growth spike as a result of smokable flower being allowed. And so part of that is because it is still so specialized in Florida, and the requirements for the physician to become not only able to recommend, but also there's a whole separate database they have to be trained on. They have to do it. They can't have staff do it. And so just from a practicality standpoint, a lot of physicians that have a quote normal practice, because the legislatures, they're like, well, why aren't doctors just adding it to their regular practices? I'm like, well, because you haven't integrated it into their normal sort of flow, right?
Yeah.
And so it's
a whole different animal.
It is. And so that's something we've been talking about, trying to raise awareness in hopes that at some point the legislature may step in and smooth some of that out.
Great. Yeah. And so lastly, I just want to know kind of what was it about the cannabis industry that led you to want to leave law? And what kind of, and the second part to the question is what's the best story you've seen since you've been in cannabis?
Oh, geez. There's so many great stories. So I'm a recovering lawyer.
Yeah.
And then I in the middle there, kind of from leaving law, I had a middle life there where I was an entrepreneur. And so I was involved in a company that would do hospitality, aggregation, repurpose, and then sales. So I had just had an exit of a portfolio of hotels when I was approached to get involved in the company that now is Trulieve. And that was in 2014, I believe.
Oh,
and,
wow.
My answer immediately was, I don't know.
Yeah.
So we did a ton of diligence, traveled the country, went in a bunch of grows.
Were you kind of like, I don't know because it's marijuana? And you were like,
listen, my dad's a police officer.
Oh, wow.
He was a police officer for 20,
really adds to the
25 years, in Jacksonville.
And what does he think of this now?
No,
like, is your whole family supportive of it?
Yeah, super on board. And my mom was an assistant principal of an elementary school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, you can imagine, right? So I'm like, oh, okay. But did the research and realized what a phenomenal opportunity this really was. And then I will say that I fell in love with the industry after we won our license, probably about 6 months in, when we were actually selling and interacting with patients. And when I started to realize, wow, not only is this an incredible business, and I can see the growth and I can see the opportunity from that side of it, this is a business that is reaching people in a real way.
Helping
and so
people.
I call that kind of a triple bottom line. And it's really the only industry that I've ever seen like that. And I would say that, one of my favorite stories is it's really early on. There's a grandmother who had a very rare condition, and her eyes basically were swollen shut. She had face spasms, and she couldn't see. And it had been like that for years. And she started taking our products, and after I think it was 3 days, she literally could open her eyes.
Oh, that's
And her story was just like, it was like Christmas morning.
wow.
And so, when we have an opportunity, and there's so many more aside from that, but just she loved a garden, so she was able to go out and work in her garden. And so, and there's story after story like that that we see. So when we open a store, I work the counter for a couple hours every time, and so I thankfully get to experience a lot of those hugs and a lot of those thank yous. And I tell folks, 'cause people say, "Oh, that's so great of you that you work the counter," and I said, "Don't get it twisted. That's not for them. That's for
not
me."
looking for the recognition.
It's for me, because that well of love is something that, look, this job gets hard. It's it's a grind. I love it, and it's an exciting grind. But when you have 419% growth, year-over-year growth in revenue, you're busy.
A little busy.
And so, it's an amazing business that you're able to know that when things get hard, or you have a tough day, that you can I can call back to those interactions, and really know that it's meaningful work.
That's excellent.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've got a very busy schedule, and we appreciate the time to sit down with you.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks. Hi, it's Grace from the CSE, reminding you to make sure to follow us on social media for the latest updates on our listed companies, as well as new listing alerts. For more in-depth content, be sure to pick up our free quarterly magazine, Public Entrepreneur, available online at thecsc.com.